Welcome to the Circular Firing Squad. I'm Marty, a counseling faculty at Kent State University and host for Circular Firing Squad. We have 4 members, 4 questions, and 4 answers to each question. Each squad member generates a question that we all have to answer, ranging from the pastoral to the pathetic. Let's see who's with us tonight.
Hi, everybody. Elliott Ingersoll from Cleveland State University and host of Apply Topically.
Hey, everyone. Mitch Conrad, clinical mental health counseling student at Cleveland State University and counselor trainee at Baldwin Wallace University.
Hi, I'm Angelika, a doctoral candidate at Kent State University. I'm currently working on my dissertation on the experiences of multiracial individuals in higher education. I'm also a licensed professional counselor and founder and CEO of Golden Hour Counseling and Wellness.
Well, this is Angelika. It only took 82 shows to get Angelika to join us. We tried, and after I think the 82nd show, she finally broke down. So it's good to have you here. Some of our other folks, Stephanie is recuperating, and we hope she has a quick recuperation. Everything's fine, but she wanted the night off because she just had some procedure done a couple days ago. And then is hosting the Super Bowl for his in-laws. So we're recording on Super Bowl night. And let's see, I don't know if I've heard from other folks from the group. Oh, Elvis was going to join us, but he had an emergency come up. He was going to be part of the show tonight. So we hope things work out for him and we'll see him again in another week. Elliott, you have got the first question.
Okie dokie. We hear a lot of people saying, now is the time to protest. Do you think protests have any impact on the issues being protested?
Yeah, I wanted to come at this question from the angle of what is it like to find other people who care about the same issues, right? And so if people are out there protesting, or if they're out there advocating, or if they're out there showing support and solidarity in any way, one of the benefits is connection between individuals from my perspective who care about similar issues. And so there's been times where I've been advocating and have met people who are passionate about the same kind of stuff that I otherwise wouldn't have met if I hadn't actually been out there sort of doing the thing. And so I do appreciate it from that perspective, at least, where sometimes with some of these issues, at least to me, it can at least initially feel a little isolating. However, when we're able to find a community of people around us who are also caring about these same issues and allowing us to feel that unity and solidarity, then I think that at least for us, it provides a more foundational base for advocacy and for protesting, I would say. And so, yeah, I do think it has some of the effect, at least that way, in terms of the greater effect on issues that I think can remain to be seen in some cases. But I do perceive that there's a good opportunity for connection with people who care.
So, yes, I believe that protests can have an impact. I'm thinking about throughout history how movements like the civil rights or women's suffrage or LGBTQ rights have led to actionable changes. And all of these were supported by an uproar of support from the communities. Protests raise awareness at the end of the day and apply much needed pressure on policymakers and people in those positions of power. And protests also mobilize communities toward some sort of action. So obviously, change isn't always immediate. The legal system is a very slow-moving entity, which has been proven time and time again. But I do think that sustained protest efforts can shift attitudes and influence policy decisions. In my experience, I have attended a few protests myself, and the energy that I have personally felt in those environments has always been so inspiring. And I can see how they offer momentum towards the next push and the next push and so on.
I've done my fair share of showing up at protests, and I'm going to be the cold sponge here. It's always hard for me to tell, and I would like to be optimistic that we're having an impact. But sometimes I think protests are just cathartic, really, and nothing more. Particularly with recent events, I'm concerned that voices aren't being heard anyways. I mean, nobody's standing up and screaming. Everybody should be standing up and screaming. Even members of Congress should be standing up and screaming, but nobody seems to be. And my fear is that means there's no impact of change if people disagree, or at least modifying it or sitting at a table and talking about the rationale for doing it. It's just, this is how it's going to be. This is our new reality. But, I have some doubt that it doesn't convince people who you want to convince to change their vote or change their direction. But it doesn't, I don't think we should be complicit. So I guess it needs to happen to let people know that this is not an all-in for everybody.
Oh, thanks. These are great answers. And I would agree with what everyone said. And in certain perspectives, I'm a bit more in Marty's corner on this one. I guess you could look at multiple, if you took everyone's answer, and in some cases, maybe a protest was most effective at helping committed people find each other. And in other cases, maybe it triggered further protests and raised awareness of the issue. And I think all those can happen. My concern nowadays, and I've been to a lot of protests, I even kind of organized one. I think a protest is effective to it's inversely proportional to how beat up you are walking away from it. When they start swinging the sticks, then you know that you've hit something. You've got your finger on something. It seems like, in terms of acute effect, you have to interfere with some sort of flow of money, the bottom line. And one of the anti-nuclear protests, we were all holding up a factory plant going online. And that was a much more robust response than like the Gulf Wars that I protested. And so I think if your point's being made to the people with the power, there's usually other people with nightclubs, billy sticks, best case scenario, coming down. That's why you wear your motorcycle gear and you put your PVC pipe in the sleeves of your jacket and across the back and all that. But I don't know. I wish they did more, but I feel like in our polarized society, people automatically say, oh, well, those are just, extremists, or they're being infiltrated by extremists. I don't know. But should we stop doing it? No, I just think we should be mindful of what are we aiming for.
Mitch, next question.
That was
All right.
cheerful.
I got some protest tips in there. All right, my question is, what are the benefits of receiving counseling while simultaneously providing it?
So I may be biased as a counselor who has had individual and couples counseling on and off for many years, but I believe it is important and it helps with personal growth and emotional balance and seeing therapy from both sides. When therapists work through their own stuff and they do their own healing, they're less likely to burn out and stay more self-aware, which can make them show up even better for their own clients. Plus, I think it shows how important self-care is, and it sets a good example for seeking support and breaking down the stigma around mental wellness.
When I first read this question, Mitch, I thought it was, should I be receiving counseling at the same time I'm providing it? And I might go against the grain on this one. I think receiving counseling is great. I think, as Angelika said, some really good stuff. I mean, she summarized all the reasons why counselors should be getting counseling or have the experience of counseling. But if a life situation is so imposing on me that I'm seeking counseling to resolve it at that time, I really got to keep in check about providing counseling to someone else, because I am afraid that I'm just going to countertransfer all over the individual based on what's going on with my own situation. So as Angelika said, it helps you become a better counselor because you know yourself better and you know how to keep that stuff in check. But really, if I am really struggling and am going to see a counselor to address a severe issue in my personal life or my own life, I got to wonder about whether I should be on the other end on the sending end of that piece, because I'm concerned that I just won't be able to keep objective, or I'll be working through my own stuff while listening to them.
I appreciate, Marty, your caveat. That was my first thought. Is there was one period where I had so many things hitting me. I would say I was impaired and I wasn't able to see clients, and I didn't see clients. It was a short period, but it was very real. but I tend to stay in counseling when I have a person I'm really connecting with. I'm big on the Rogers idea that one doesn't have to be in a crisis necessarily to benefit. And in those instances, yeah, I think it's delightful to kind of perceive it from both ends. And then being a musician, if I see my therapist do something I might want to do in the future, I'm like, yeah, I can steal that. That's a good one. So there's that mercenary part. But yeah, I think as long as I'm not in a heavy duty crisis, I think that it keeps the channels clearer. And yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for your answers there, enlightening for me. One of the, and Doctor, I definitely identify with the Rogerian idea of, counseling is something that I feel, like I enjoy engaging with, especially like when not in crisis. It's almost like that I don't enjoy it when I like have a crisis or something in my life, but more along the lines that I'm just like processing the everyday stuff. I do enjoy how especially because I was a client before I was a counselor. And one of the things that I've really appreciated is that idea of knowing how it feels to be a client has allowed me some greater empathy for the client experience. And that's something that I'm not sure if I would have perceived as much if I hadn't spent some significant time inside of counseling. And so, in that regard, I do think there's a harm reductive aspect when the individual sitting in the counselor role has an increased level of awareness for what it's like to be in the client role as well. So I do really appreciate the idea of like some additional benefits, and also hear how, right, like we are also like processing our own stuff all the time, and we want to also like be there for our clients in the counseling role as much as we can. And we're not perfect, so it's nice, I think. And like you said, Doctor, I really do appreciate like learning from other counselors and like seeing what they're doing in the room. We don't really get too much of a chance for that. So that's always cool when I see my counselor do something. I'm like, yeah, I'm taking that.
Yeah, I just wanted to open this up for any other comments. I mean, I have a couple that I can think of, but in particular, what Elliott said about resonating with learning about stealing some good stuff from some good counselors that you're working with. I think the impairment piece is real important. And sometimes we're not our own best critic about that. That if I'm sitting and seeing a counselor and I'm in a pretty much of a crisis situation in my personal life, I might say, yeah, I can separate the two, and maybe I can't. So I still have some concerns about that. Luckily, I haven't been in counseling positions while my life crises have gone on, and while I have worked with counselors. I mean, I'm working with a counselor right now, kind of trying to do more self-growth around existential end of life issues. So what is my retirement going to look like? What is my, how am I going to manage that? What does that mean in terms of my identity? But I'm not practicing counseling right now. So I like the idea. I encourage it with all my students to get some experience on the other side of the chair as a client or in group, especially get some group experience. So you know what good groups run like. I don't know if folks had anything else they wanted to say on the question.
I think it requires a great deal of discernment. I've had periods where I was in supervision groups with different people, and like back to your point, Marty, if I was sharing a crisis and if they thought I can't imagine how you're able to function as a counselor while you're navigating this crisis. I mean, that feedback was something I took very seriously and sincerely. But it's good to have people in your life to give you that feedback. My big fear, like, now we're so disconnected from each other, and we have loneliness as an epidemic in many societies, including ours, and so many people talk to so few other people. It's like, yeah, who do they talk to other than a counselor? Might not be anyone in their life, and that's not uncommon these days.
I think also to add on to what's being like thrown in there about discernment, balance is really also key. I'd be thinking about people that pursue this degree in the first place. People that thrive in higher education settings, they're critical thinkers. There's a learning curve and they enjoy that aspect. And reflecting on my own experience, which has always been like low-key therapy while I've been practicing, there have been times that I have been so excited about something new that my therapist had been sharing with me that I maybe forgot myself and like the work that I was trying to do and was focused on how do I get to share this with my clients. So just right, just back to that like discernment and balance and focusing on what you're there for and also how you're serving as well.
Angelika, you've got the next question.
Okay. So, what is one belief or perspective you've had to unlearn recently, and how did it change the way you see the world?
This was a tough
There's a
question.
couple ones here. Yeah,
This was
that's a biggie.
This was a tough question for me to try and respond to. And then it kind of hit me, and I don't know if it was recent, but recent enough in the last 3 to 4 years. And that was belief or perspective you've had to unlearn recently, organized religion. I grew up Catholic for 54 years, and that was the toughest thing for me to shake. Just the idea that, when I finally stopped attending church and stopped focusing on that, but then I had this kind of, well, where am I going to get community? Where, and the community really wasn't that good for me to begin with. But this sense that I had to be connected to a religious community and an organized religion. And all of them were very different, but similar in a lot of ways. And people might disagree with me in terms of organized religion, but Buddhism was kind of where I fell. And that's changed my worldview in a lot of ways. It happened, and I think I've mentioned this on the show before, it happened by doing a lot of meditation at the recommendation of someone. And I started doing that, and then I needed to find people to do that with, because you can do that alone, but it's also fulfilling to do that with. COVID struck, cancer diagnosis. I don't know how I would have gotten through my cancer treatment and diagnosis without kind of having a Buddhist perspective about it. So that's changed the way in which I see the world.
This one triggered so many ideas. I mean, because there's a lot. There's a lot of the most recent perspective. I think it was my being absorbed into, what do they call that? Consensus effect. So, like, for example, I really thought this last election, I didn't think it was going to go the way it went. And the consensus effect said that because you hang around people in higher education who are known to be more left of center politically, that is what you've been exposed to. And then you assumed the rest of the population was similarly distributed. And my partner was always like, nah, they're not distributed the same way. And she works in a steel plant, so she knows a lot about other perspectives. And I totally got blown away by that one. So I had to, and I'm not going to be angry at half of the country or a third of the country just because of the way they voted. But it did reveal a huge blind spot that I had. The other one, was the whole time thing. And I've tried to deal with this intellectually, but, I've had some experiences where time did not seem real. And the physicists seem to agree with me in time not being real. It's given me a different way of looking at, like, what if when we die, we all die at the same time? And everyone's like, no, wait a minute. I lived 30 years after you died. And I'll be like, no. Time's not real. Those 30 years were illusory in some weird way, just as my 63 years have been illusory in some weird way. That's a biggie. I'm not pained to let go of it, though, because, again, getting into my mid 60s and contemplating mortality, and, there's no sense being bent about something that's on everyone's schedule. I'm not bent out of shape about it, but I just wonder what is really going on here. And a lot of my meditation, my yoga practice, contemplative prayer, spiritual direction, it's all been aimed at trying to get beneath the veil, to get beneath the surface. There's that part of me that always wants to dig. And I think that's helped me in many ways, especially with the time thing. I think the other one was kind of pairing with Marty's idea about organized religion. And as I start thinking about what would I retire to, because I can't really retire unless I have something to, I have other things I'm doing, but what's going to be my focus? And there's a part of me that still wants to finish seminary. I don't know if I will or not. There's also a part of me that wants to try stand-up comedy. So seminary or stand-up comedy, send your cards and letters to circularfiringsquad@gmail.com. Let me know what I should do.
I feel like we should have like a time question. I feel like I don't know if I've missed us having like a time question, but I feel like a full dedicated question towards the theory of time would be nice. For me, this is, I mean, a little personal here too, right? One of the things that I've been focusing on in my own sort of like personal growth or spiritual practice is really the idea of like the internal versus the external. And in the past, I think a lot of what I would do when I perceived that I was being treated poorly was that I would sort of like blame the other person. But I also had noticed that these were also things that to some extent I may have been blaming internally. Sort of like thoughts about myself or feelings about myself. And I noticed that when I started to get into more meditative work, and I hesitate to call it work, but meditative practice and just spiritual practice, that focusing really on my internal state and saying like nicer things to myself and being kinder to myself and just being gentler with myself has seemed to pay external dividends in that other people treat me better too, and that I treat other people better too as well. And that's something that I have felt surprised about, I suppose, because it can feel, easy sometimes to, to blame externally. And I've wondered what this practice, I'm still sort of like exploring it, but I've just noticed the more that I focused internally on like, how am I treating myself? How am I talking about myself? How am I talking to myself? And all those kinds of things. How does Mitch treat Mitch, I suppose? That it's just paid a lot of dividends in life. And I think that a lot of my friendships and relationships and all that have become a lot more meaningful because of it.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I really appreciate hearing these answers. And yeah, sorry for the curveball. For me, I found myself recently challenging the belief that productivity equals my worth. Hence the question in general. Just open up dialogue about it. So this has been like coming up for me recently, especially starting my practice and just starting to notice that my to-do list never ends, from like learning about all the ins and outs of insurance and billing and marketing, and like on top of the actual talk therapy and documentation. I just feel like there's always things to learn and there's always things to do. So, with that to-do list never seeming to end, I started feeling like I'm not actually being productive and had to be like, wait. We need to do some reflection and reassess where we stand on this and how this is reflecting who I am and some of those internal scripts that, come up about myself. So for me, this belief in productivity equals like worth. This is like rooted in second generational immigrant mentality, where my mom, who immigrated to the US from the Philippines, has been raised on this idea that she had to work really hard to secure financial stability for herself and her family, and that her ability to do so reflected on like contributing to the family, which naturally feels fulfilling for her, and as it should. And for a lot of AAPI and BIPOC, feeling or like receiving the message that we need to work twice as hard to get half as far is very, very common. And this message often perpetuates this idea that working hard leads to just that, financial security, but also overexhaustion and very little time for other things that could nurture your soul. So this is a belief that I see a lot with many people in the Filipino community and AAPI and BIPOC in general. So I also believe this is like a generational belief that I have, where like older generations may be thinking that working hard like equates to a comfier life, which is, yes, weighted in some truth, but also it's not always the case, and maybe it misses the mark sometimes. So now where I'm at, as an adult, I see myself having to unlearn some of these messages about productivity being linked to my self-worth and who I am and my value. Just realizing that those two things can have some relation, which works for me, but also they can be separate. And this allows me to give myself some of that grace when I review my to-do list at the end of the day and I see that I haven't completed everything and it just gets copied and pasted and carried on to the next day. So just reminding myself that I'm doing the best and affording myself a little extra patience. That's something that I've had on my mind recently.
Quick tag on too. The other thing I would say is dealing with aging, because I never believed age was just a number. I thought that was total shite, but I bombed through my 50s, no real problem, man. It was like my late 30s. It wasn't different. And then like 60, that was my mathematical number. And then when I got my first knee replacement, it was like it flipped the old man switch. And I came out of that and it drained so much energy out of me and like just recovering. I'm sleeping so much. And then I've got long COVID and I got all these things. And I'm like, everyone's like, yeah, aging is just a number. I'm like, nah, I'm not sure what it is, because if time's not real, what is it, right? Okay, here we go. It's a relentless process. If you're in your brain's groove with how it's interpreting the signals from reality to create the illusion of linear time. But bear with me, folks, this gets better. I've also been wondering, okay, if time's not real, everything's happening at once. So like when people say they die and they review their life, no. They're just finally getting a clear look. You live in this wonderful city and every inch of that city is some part of your life. Every building is some aspect of your development. Every structure is some piece of your character, and it's the most wonderful place in the world. But you can see it all at once for the first time. And then you're not locked in the old body that's falling apart, which is fine. I'm really okay with a lot of it because, frankly, I hated running, for example. And when I said you can't run anymore, I was like, happy day. When my kids say you can't drive anymore, we're having a party. I'm fine with a lot of this. But I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what it means. It doesn't feel right because I wake up feeling like a young man with something wrong. And I haven't been able to square that in my daily experience, but I suspect I will do it or I'll die trying.
Yeah, I fought aging and the idea of aging for a long time. And now it's just like, embrace it. There's just, and it's really pretty cool. There's lots of freedoms with it that you don't have when you're younger. I mean, some of the things that you talked about, Angelika, in terms of, productivity and self-worth, when you get older, when you get, to a certain age, it's like, who cares? And it's so freeing that way in a lot of ways. So don't be afraid of it. That's my message.
Like George Carlin says, you never have to lift anything heavy ever again. Just look like you're in pain and someone will be like, oh, can I help you with that? Yeah. Where are you taking it? Indianapolis. Let's go. Come on.
All right. Let me get to my question. My question has been brought on by sort of the political stuff that's gone on in the last couple of weeks and what's going on in our own college. I know it's happened in Elliott's college in terms of the reorganization around education and what education is going to look like. So, given the political changes, where do you think education will be in 2035, 10 years from now?
Wow. That's, again, it's a heavy question. I'll tell you what I would like to think will happen, and I'll start with higher education. Higher education will finally, really become truly more efficient. And there's a lot we could do. I've been writing my buddy, Governor Mike DeWine, to make me the czar of higher education in Ohio. I've got some ideas. I think I might be able to solve a lot of these problems. You cut your low-performing programs, however painful it is, you cannot escape doing it. You cut them. Everyone's on a 12-month contract. You have 3 15-week semesters, none of this crap where you're doing 2 6-week summer semesters where people can't even remember their name when they get out of a 6-week class. I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah, 3 15-week semesters. And if you don't want to teach summer, you teach your classes in the fall and the spring semesters. I mean, there's still wiggle room. The K-12, my biggest concern with that is that it'll become stratified like our society, and there will be no safety nets for children coming from people in more challenging circumstances everyone deserves access to education. I believe that. It's my belief. Who cares? But I do believe that. And I think the public schools in our country, I worry about that. They were here to help create an educated citizenry. That was the idea. And they don't even teach civics and history in a lot of schools anymore, which is really frightening. And you could say, oh, well, those were all, from a postmodern, deconstructive, Marxist perspective, those were all dead white guys, blah, blah, blah. But no, it's still history that has to be reckoned with, even if you don't agree with it. So, boy, I do worry about the K-12 system. I think the higher ed system, the sky's the limit because it's going to have to become more efficient. And we got colleges, especially small colleges, closing down all over the place. And this was predicted easily 20 years ago. And now here we are. But human beings, we don't like to make the painful choices. And I hope that we figure out a way to blend a willingness to make the painful choices with a sense of social justice and what is going to be good for everybody in the society, not just a few people. But I worry most about the K-12. I think the higher ed piece, even if they turn it to a for-profit model, which I totally disagree with, it'll correct itself. The K-12 is the most vulnerable. And I'm not going to go dystopian because every 4 years we have elections. I hope we still have them. But, back in the 30s and 40s, there were people who thought the world was ending because Roosevelt got elected to 4 terms as president. My parents thought he was a saint, and I tend to agree with them because of how I was raised, but I'm also like, yeah, I can see where that would be, you'd start to get a little nervous with the same person at the helm for 16 years. So there's lots of thoughts I have on this. I apologize that I'm rambling a bit because these aren't well-formulated conclusions. I just kind of read the questions before the show, but those are my thoughts off the top of my head. I'm not funny at all tonight. Sorry about that. No humor at all. We're working on it, but I can be screamingly funny, at times.
Yeah, I didn't even think of the K through 12 portion of this because I was thinking of it specifically for higher education. And so I'll just go from there. I feel worried about mandates and the idea of, right, like what does the government getting their hand more into something like college education look like is something that does worry me because I do think that generally people have an idea of like what they find to be like good programs that are like I don't want to say it that way. People have different opinions about like the level of value that a program brings. However, to have someone in higher levels of government administration sort of like decide on that for everybody else is what worries me. And we're a long way from 2035. And of course, a lot can happen in 4 years, and also a lot cannot happen in 4 years. And so I do have some amount of hope that this just sort of like bypasses and just like we're fine. But I do also see that there seem to be some amount of shakeups coming, especially with stuff like, removal of DEI. I know that this is a large concern at BW where I work, and many students are affected by it. And so I think it even, like from the teaching perspective, I do think that there are some like legitimate large level concerns here. Students, I do wonder, are they less willing to engage and go to college when they know that these programs of support for them are being removed? And so if students, for instance, don't have organizations on campus that are representative of them, are they less inclined to go to those colleges, right? And I'm not really interested in recruitment. I'm certainly not recruiting for a college. But I do wonder what it looks like from the student perspective going in, right? Are there people on campus who I feel connected with? Are there organizations on campus who I feel connected with? And if there aren't, then do less people just end up going to college because of some of this stuff?
This is such a big question. I was also focusing from a higher education perspective, and my answer is probably very idealistic, which is very on brand for me. So if I'm thinking generally where I see education evolving, I can see like a greater emphasis on civic education. So depending on like political priorities, where there may be a stronger push for like media literacy and critical thinking and civic engagement, perhaps in response to misinformation and political polarization. Historically, where there has been a political push to perpetuate the marginalization of certain groups, the response has often been those marginalized groups strengthening themselves within community, whether that's on campus or not on campus, but there's a lot of exposure to others that are like-minded in these environments. And then pushing back through like grassroots efforts and advocacy as far as student responses. For faculty responses, their hands may be a little tied in these situations. So we may see this reflected in educational settings.
I wish I could be as optimistic. Again, here comes the cold sponge. The idea that marginalized groups are going to be able to have an impact. I want them to. I think politically right now, it's going to be very difficult to, and I'm afraid you remove all those ways of doing that. And what happens is you wind up with an institution that doesn't serve marginalized populations. I kind of took this question at a larger level. First of all, I'm 67 years old. 10 years from now, I hope I won't be teaching, although it's the one thing that I enjoy doing at my institution right now. I certainly don't like the administrative stuff. I certainly don't like the politics that are going on right now. The way that the state government and national government is attacking education is disturbing to me. So out of all of this, I can say, I just kind of feel like the institution is going to be dramatically changed. In 10 years from now, we're not going to look anything like the way we look now. The part that bothers me the most is I don't think liberal education it's going to be over. People will not have sort of history, culture, common philosophy, things like that will all disappear from higher education. And I think it will serve only the purpose of providing trained workers and not trained thinkers. That's what scares me the most of what the next 10 years are going to be like. But a couple of things. I'll be retired or I'll be dead. So it's your problem to figure out. Boy, what a uplifting show.
Yikes.
Can we do a humor insertion here?
Sure. Go for it.
Okay.
Obviously, you're either going to go into the seminary or you're going to be a comedian. And so far, it looks like the seminary piece is going to win out. So give it a shot, Elliott.
I'll give you two jokes. One's going to be a biblical joke. Cain and Abel as little kids. Hey, Dad, why is that garden blocked off? Hey, why is that garden blocked off? Yeah, there's an angel in front of it. Yeah, he's got a sword. Yeah, that sword's on fire and it turns every which way. And then Adam says, you ask your mother about that. That's the conventional punchline. The punchline I would prefer would be Adam saying, that's a story for another day. Cain, quit roughhousing. You're going to kill your brother. You know that? That'd be the other punchline. I kind of prefer that. Non-biblical humor. A duck walks into a convenience store and says, got any duck food? And the guy's like, no, we have no duck food. Duck leaves. Next day, a duck walks into a convenience store. Do you have any duck food? And the guy's like, no, I told you yesterday. We don't have any duck food. Get out of here. Third day, duck walks into the darn convenience store. You got any duck food? No, the manager says, and if you come back in here, I'm going to nail your little web feet to the floor. The duck considers this and then exits. And yet, the next day, duck shows up again. You got any duck food? No, I told you. And if I hear you again here, I'm going to nail your little feet to the floor. Duck runs out this time. Next day, duck comes back again and says, you got any nails? Guy goes, no. You got any duck food?
Seminar it is.
I don't know.
You don't know, Mitch. You like the duck joke. One last final shot question for everybody. And this came from Elvis. And then, this is Elvis's question. And I hate to say it, it's kind of a downer. But when I put them together, I didn't think we were going to deal with another downer. If it was your last day on Earth, where would you like to spend the last minutes?
Well, it's easy for me. If I had enough lead time, I'd book a gig with one of the groups I play with, and I'd spend those last minutes performing because I lose my sense of self when I'm performing. And, when I make the transition, I probably won't even know until I'm across the rainbow bridge.
So for me, go ahead, Mitch.
Sure. So I'm going to take a weird shot at this. I'm going to be on a rocket ship into outer space towards a colony somewhere. They'll still, I guess, survive, I suppose.
So I think you looked at the question differently. It was like I looked at it as I'm dying.
I did too, and I was like, well, I guess that I avoid the death part for now.
Oh, in Elliott's magical time world, maybe. Angelika, what's yours?
Well, so I also have an unhinged answer. If we're talking about an alien invasion, I would really prefer to be taken at this point. I think that while everyone would be running for cover and ransacking grocery stores, I would be found approaching whatever type of mothership just landed, and I would willingly go because I think I've just had it. So I think it's time for me to also leave this earth, if I'm being quite honest.
Wow, I thought of this as kind of, okay, I'm crossing over to the other side, like Elliott. We might not meet on the other side, but I'm crossing over to the other side, like Elliott. But I thought of the most pleasant place on earth for me, which is in Istanbul in May, sitting in a coffee shop by the side of the Marmara, watching the boats go by. And I'd love to have my family there, It would be just wonderful if my family could sit there with me. And that would be the place I'd want to be. So maybe our listeners have ideas about where they'd want to be on a rocket ship, being taken by aliens, or sitting on the side of drinking tea on the Marmara. But let us know if you do. I want to thank the firing squad for joining us tonight, Elliott, Mitch, and for the first time, Angelika, and hope she will be back for future shows with this. And maybe we'll get some more lighthearted questions next time. I try to put some stuff in there, about counseling because that's part of our audience, but the rest of them were kind of really tough questions. And I blame myself for that too. Sort of the mood I'm in with education. So look for some of these characters on their podcasts on the podtalk.net. You can find a bunch of our shows on the podtalk.net, including the Tech Savvy Professor with Eric, who's at the Stupid Bowl right now. And as we're recording this, it's halftime, and the Eagles are ahead 24-0. Ha, ha, ha. There you go, Chiefs.
Are you serious about that?
Yeah, I just checked.
Is that real?
Yeah.
Dang. Oh, that Eagles offensive line is something.
Well, Vision Profiles, check it on Monday night. Another Eric does that with me about the Apple Vision Pro headset, VR and AR headsets. I'm doing a show with my son now called Gear Up and Go. So technology you use for traveling, which is kind of fun. And I'm engaged in a bunch of other podcasts too. So take a look at thepodtalk.net to find out more about them. Our theme music is from Menage a Quad, Real Swing Shet. That's it for this episode of Circular Firing Squad. Ready, fire, aim.